Thank you for inviting me here. Thank you guys for coming. Fun fact. Well, I never intended to be an academic. I actually got expelled 3 times from my undergraduate psychology degree. And my professors, when my professor was writing me a reference letter for my PhD course, he was like laughing at me. Like, I'll never get in and I will never make it. And here I am. Actually, I actually met him a few years ago, and we went back to those times when no one believed I will make it. But, well, great to be here, and I probably don't really have to spend too much time convincing you guys that you are leaving an enormous amount of digital footprints behind when using Google and Google Maps and Gmail and Facebook and other products and services. And quite some time ago, back in 2012, IBM estimated that an average person produces 500 megabytes of digital footprints every single day. And this includes people that are too young or too old to own a computer or a smartphone, or people too poor or living in too remote areas to own devices. So essentially, you guys here in the room are most likely producing much, or used to produce much more digital footprints than that. And of course, our capability to produce digital footprints is growing extremely quickly. Recently, The Economist estimated that in 2025, we'll be producing 62 gigabytes of digital footprints every single day. And now, to help you imagine how much data that is, let us actually go back to this number here, 500 megabytes. If you wanted to back up 500 megabytes of data on letter-sized paper, double-sided, single-lined, Times New Roman, size 12. Let's print it out in zeros and ones. How tall would be a stack of paper containing just 1 day worth of data that humanity used to produce back in 2012? Any accountants in the room? Any guesses? Come on, guys. 100 feet, great, more than that. Great, more than that. 100 stories, even more than that. Like from here to the sun, 4 times over. No. This is just 1 day worth of data backed up on paper that we used to produce in 2012. Now, when we're quickly ramping up our capability, so let's hope that no one wants to back this amount of data that we're going to produce in 2025 on paper. I actually calculated that the stack of DVDs, if you wanted to back it up on DVDs, 100,000 kilometers. So 1/4 of the way to the moon. Okay, so we're producing all of these digital footprints, and now the question is, what can be gleaned from them? And I know that you guys at Google do a lot of work trying to analyze digital footprints in order to improve people's experience when using your products. But of course, there are companies and actors out there that may want to use it to infer other facts about the users, perhaps their intimate traits. And I have a short video here that shows you results of one of our early studies where we looked at people's Facebook likes. Facebook likes are one of those generic types of digital footprints, very similar to your browsing log, very similar to your purchase records, to your search records, essentially connections between people and some pieces of content. In the context of Facebook, those connections can be created by clicking like. So we've collected likes of around 60,000 users, and we also collected a bunch of their intimate traits, such as their personality, IQ, their sexual orientation, political views, using questionnaires and psychometric tests, and then try to see whether you can train simple machine learning models to predict those intimate traits from their Facebook likes. And no one really likes anything overly intimate. It's actually not possible on Facebook because there's some censorship of what you can like going on there. And yet, just by looking at those connections between people and pieces of content, you can make a very broad range of predictions about their intimate, psychological, or demographic traits. And this is because the data you can see on the surface is essentially just a tip of an iceberg. And now when you take this data and apply some AI on machine learning, you can make inferences spanning much beyond what's directly observable in the data. right? So if someone liked, Barack Obama and the Democrats and other, left-leaning pages on Facebook, then you don't really need to run any predictions. It's pretty obvious this guy, what are the political views of this person. The whole idea here is that you don't need to do this. You can just read books that might be completely not related to political views and then like them on Facebook, or like those pictures of funny goats, or status updates describing what your cousin is doing. And yet, just by looking at those things that are on the surface absolutely unrelated to political views, a very simple algorithm can make extremely accurate predictions when it comes to a very broad range of intimate psychological and demographic traits. Which brings me to the next question: how accurate are such predictions? And now when we started looking at this, we thought, hey, maybe we'll try to predict gender and age and political views. But what happened is that those predictions are close to perfect. So, when I show, this slide, it's just, 99% accuracy of predicting age and gender, and probably the inaccuracy stems from some imperfection of the ground truth. And so we thought this is not really a fun thing to look at. Not to mention that people were not that impressed, because they say, hey, I can judge people's gender or their age or their political views fairly easily as well. So I'm not that impressed that a computer can do it accurately as well. So what we thought, hey, let's give a computer a slightly more complicated, slightly more difficult task, something that people cannot do so easily. So we thought, hey, let's try to see whether we can predict personality from people's Facebook likes. And now we are all actually somewhat good at predicting other people's personalities. If you have a friend, if you hang out with them, you will know their personality after, some time. In fact, even if I showed you a picture of someone, you would be able to judge their personality with some absolutely minimal accuracy. So we have some ability to judge other people's personality, but it turns out that simple algorithms based on Facebook likes are much, much better than us. So you can see here is a plot showing how accurately can we predict big 5 personality traits given the number of Facebook likes that we are revealing to the algorithm. You can see here it's a log scale, but as you can see here, the more likes you reveal to an algorithm, the more accurate the predictions are getting. And you can also see that the personality trait of openness, it's the one that can be most easily predicted from Facebook likes. Now, if there were any psychologists in the room, I would get a wow for this plot, because this shows that those predictions are extremely accurate. Now, let me show you how accurate those predictions are by comparing this accuracy with the accuracy that can be achieved by human judges. So what we've done, we judged personality of our participants using their Facebook likes, and we also asked their friends and family members and coworkers to fill in a personality questionnaire in their name. Now, if you know someone, if you hang out with them at work or at home, if you raise them because they're a child, you should be able to accurately answer questions about whether this person likes poetry, or whether they are on time when it comes to the meetings, or whether they are orderly, or whether they're extroverted or introverted, right? The essence of knowing someone is to be able to answer these questions. People are good at answering those questions, as I mentioned before. But now let's see how our accuracy compares with the accuracy of the computer algorithm based on all of those funny goats that you liked on Facebook. So how many likes do you think do you need to reveal to an algorithm for it to be better than your work colleagues at predicting your responses to a personality questionnaire? 150. Do you have great work colleagues? It's quite likely. On average, our work colleagues don't know us that well. And 10 Facebook likes is enough to reach the accuracy of your work colleague. Now, family members, friends, and cohabitants, you need around 100, 150 likes in order to outperform them. And now the most accurate of human judges, people that know you the most, your spouses, you need around 300, 250, 300 Facebook likes for an algorithm to be more accurate at predicting your answers to a personality questionnaire. Now, this is somewhat upsetting to anyone who has a spouse, because this essentially means that, in one day, probably you produce enough digital footprints for a silly algorithm to know you better than your spouse knows you, to be able to predict your future behavior and your preferences better than your spouse can do it. And this is really upsetting. Look, spouses know us really well. They see us across many different contexts. They see us in intimate moments. They see us angry. They see us happy. They have conversations with us on many different subjects. If you guys got married recently, your spouse still pays a lot of attention to you. And yet, turns out that 250 likes on Facebook allow a linear regression to be better at predicting your personality than your own spouse. So now the question is, how does it work? Why does this tip of an iceberg, so essentially this data that is visible on the surface, why, when combined with algorithms, it allows revealing all of this information that humans are actually not that great at judging? And we'll go through this equation really quickly. But before we do this, let me give you one practical example. So what you can see here is the history of my GPS locations, my geographical locations from Google Maps. So you can see I work at Stanford. I live next to Page Mill Road. You can see I cycle to work. Then I gave a lecture somewhere here. Then I went to Zola, and then to Nut House, and back home. It's all geotagged, essentially, and time tagged. On the surface, it just looks like a bunch of numbers describing my latitude and longitude. But what happens if you match it with some metadata? Like you match it with the names of the restaurants that I have attended. Then you can match it with the menu of those restaurants, and what you now know is what my food taste is. But you also know how affluent I am because you know how much I spend on my dinner. You know where I live. In many places in the world, just by knowing where I live, you can, again, check what my credit score is, what my mortgage is, and whether I own my house or do I rent it. You know where I work. So again, you know how much I earn. You know what I'm doing. You know that I'm drinking. No one goes to the nut house if they don't. You must like nuts a lot if you are not drinking and still are going there. And so you know that I'm drinking alcohol. Now combine it with some other types of metadata, like combine it with the history of geographical locations of other people. And suddenly you can start discovering my social network, right? If I'm in the same geographical space with a user of another phone more often than randomly, then hey, maybe there's some connection between us. And now on top of that, you can apply what we know from psychology, which is homophily. We know that people like to hang out with others that are similar to them. So now if you know political views or religiosity or sexual orientation of few people in my social network, now we can propagate this information, and now you can guess what my sexual orientation is, what my political views are, what my religiosity is, how much I earn, whether I'm married, do I, where do I go for dates, and so on. You can learn all of those intimate things just from looking at the history of GPS locations. And let me show you another example here. Imagine you have this anonymous Facebook user, and the only thing you know about them is that they liked Hello Kitty, the brand. Now, you know nothing about them, just this one fact. Now, can anyone here guess? Female. So judgmental. In fact, this retired Japanese gentleman has the largest collection of Hello Kitty toys in the world. But generally, you're right, female. Those stats, those that are not coming from my studies, this is just Facebook marketing, what is it called? Audience Insights platform, where you can check demographic profile of the audience of any Facebook alike. And you can see here, 99% of people who like Hello Kitty are females. Great. Well done, guys. So if you don't know anything about the user, you just know that they like Hello Kitty, guess that they're young female. Now, do they work in sales or in the military? Sales. Great. Of course. Are they using a PC or an iPhone? iPhone, of course. A self-respecting Hello Kitty fan doesn't even know what PC stands for. Great. So as you guys can see, just based on one single digital footprint of an anonymous person, you can make a very broad range of accurate psychodemographic predictions. And you don't need to be a computer algorithm or a psychologist or a computer scientist. So I presume you guys all computer scientists. Now, in fact, this task is not always as easy as in the context of Hello Kitty. Let me show you another Facebook like, Forrest Gump the movie. Now, what is the gender of the person that likes Forrest Gump the movie? Both, great. Gender fluids? No, actually, yes, probably to some extent. But because everyone likes Forrest Gump, you essentially would say, great, both genders love Forrest Gump because it's an amazing movie. But if you look a bit closer, you can see that there's a slight overrepresentation of men among people who like Forrest Gump, and also older people in general, right? So the information, the signal here is not as clear. But now what algorithms can do very easily, they can take tens or hundreds or thousands or millions of the digital footprints that you leave behind every single day. And each one of these footprints contains a little tiny bit of information about you, a signal about you. And now you can use an algorithm to very easily extract this signal from those megabytes of data that you are leaving behind. And now I was talking about Facebook likes and the history of GPS locations so far. But of course, there's virtually any type of the digital footprint that you leave behind can be used in predictions. So likes, history of GPS locations, your playlist, what you are saying when you are at home or around your phone, what you write in your emails. Now there's a wealth of studies showing that we can use the language that people use, and even without interpreting what they're talking about, right? You don't need an advanced algorithm that actually understands what people say. Just by looking at frequencies of the words and phrases they're using, we can make extremely accurate predictions related to the psychological traits. What you can see here is two word clouds that essentially describe language or contain words that are most diagnostic of being high or low on the personality dimension of openness to experience, which is very close with political views. Essentially, low openness is conservative, high openness tends to be very liberal. And you can see there's a very clear difference between the types of words that people are using. And those studies, those methods are not just used in the lab. They're just widespread, used by companies and governments around the world. One example here, IBM Watson, I think for a decade, over a decade now, has an API where you can upload samples of text, and IBM Watson will give you a feedback on the personality profile. And I'm sure you guys can come up with hundreds of other examples like browsing logs, search queries, data from people's phones, from the computer games, and so on. Now, one interesting type of digital footprints that I got really excited about recently for many different reasons, because it's so interesting and surprising, but also because it's so scary and poses so many privacy risks, is people's faces. It turns out that this is just yet another type of digital footprint that can be used to extract intimate information about people, about their psychodemographic traits. And now when I say that, people say, whoa, this is completely crazy. Are you going now to say that computer can just look at someone's face and judge their intimate psychodemographic traits? This is just like some kind of medieval pseudoscience. Well, it sounds like this, and this was certainly my impression when I first started thinking about this. But then I realized that we are constantly doing this. We are looking at people's faces and making conclusions, making inferences about their intimate psychodemographic traits, like age or gender. We look at people's faces, we make those judgments automatically. Emotions. Emotions are intimate psychological states, and yet we have no trouble judging these emotions from other people's faces, even when they want to hide the emotion that they're experiencing. Genes. Genes are pretty personal, and yet we have no trouble judging genetic similarity between parents and children, siblings, twins, and so on. Genetic disorders are often, in many cases, clearly displayed on people's faces. The same applies to developmental disorders. And those disorders affect not only people's faces, but also their behavior. Political views. Which of those guys voted for Trump? Right? We are not going to be accurate 100% of the time, but there are studies showing that you are going to be much better than random at judging from such profile pictures political views and religious views of people. Now, so we are great at judging a broad range of psychodemographic traits from people's faces. But then we are also pretty bad at judging other traits from people's faces. What you can see here is two famous psychologists, Sandrine and Sandra. Now, they differ on the personality dimension of extroversion. One of them is an outgoing person, another one is an introverted one. Can you guess from those two images which one is an extrovert? Who believes that Sandra here on the left is an extrovert? Hands up. Who believes that Sandrine here on the right is an extrovert? Wow, guys, you are very accurate. Sandra here on the left is an extrovert, so there was a lot of accuracy in this room. On average, people are accurate in about 54% of cases. So it's better than random, better than just toss of the coin, but not much better. Which essentially means that there seems to be some signal in people's faces, but not that much. So that may imply two things. Either there's essentially not that much signal in people's faces, or our brains did not evolve a capability to either perceive this signal or use this signal to make predictions about people's personality. Right? It might be that personality is displayed on Sandra's and Sandrine's faces as much as gender is. It's just that we just can't see it. And let me prove to you that it's the latter. What you can see here is 10 images of extroverted females and 10 images of introverted females overlaid on top of each other. No computer science, computer vision magic here. Now, no one will have any trouble guessing which of those groups are extroverts, right? You can see extroverted women, much more likely to smile on the picture, wear makeup, dye their hair. You can see also here on this side, introverted women tend to wear glasses, tend to not dye their hairs. There's a different hairstyle for sure. When you look at the larger versions of these pictures, you also can see that extroverts tend to dress more liberally and also wear contact lenses because their eyes tend to be green or blue. Now, there's another difference here. As you guys can see, introverts, nostrils. Extroverts, no nostrils.
Yeah, no, I see that.
Can anyone guess why extroverts have no nostrils?
The way they're holding their head.
Great. If you are to remember just one thing from this talk, extroverts know how to take selfies. And if you want to look good at your selfie, on your selfie you want to take a picture like this from above, and then your nostrils don't show up in the picture. Now, we have rerun those studies. So those are profile pictures. But we have rerun those studies on images taken in the lab, where people would face the camera directly, makeup is removed, facial hair is removed, hair is hidden. And you can also see in those carefully taken pictures that also shapes of facial features differ slightly between introverts and extroverts. Now, those differences are not large. Those are not Hello Kitties. Those differences are more like Forrest Gumps. So humans have trouble interpreting them if we don't amplify them by overlaying many pictures on top of each other. But it turns out that computer algorithms can do it pretty easily. And now when I say that, people still say, well, maybe you're making some mistake. Why would anyone make a claim that one can predict that your intimate traits are displayed on your face? And please forgive me this little foray here into a psychological theory, but I really want to make this point very clear, that according to psychological science, it would be an extraordinary claim to make that your face is not linked with your psychological traits. And this is for three main reasons. First reason is that your psychological traits are going to affect your facial features. And there's plenty of examples of that, but let me just show you one. If you're a cheerful person that smiles and laughs a lot, over many years you would develop smile lines, right? Your face is going to look different. If you're a person that likes outdoors, guess what? Over many years your complexion will change because of the exposure to sun and wind and other elements. If you prefer playing computer games in the basement, your face would also look slightly different over many years. Now, there's also a reversed mechanism. So your face affects your psychological traits. And let me just show you again one example. Beautiful babies. We are all here, we're lucky enough to be beautiful babies, as I can judge from the faces in the audience. Now, we were also lucky because our mothers smiled at us more than they would smile at ugly babies. This is a very sad fact, but also true. Mothers tend to smile more at beautiful babies. Not only that, when those beautiful babies go to primary school, kids want to hang out with them more. They're invited to parties more. When they start dating, they're invited to dates more. When they start working, they're getting promotions more easily and getting pay rises more easily. When they want to run for office, to become a president of the United States, for example, people tend to vote for them more if they have a pretty face. Now, if throughout your life you constantly are getting things more easily, and constantly when you interact with other people, they just smile and melt in front of you because they love hanging out with such a pretty-faced person, guess what? This is going to affect your psychological traits. And there's a lot of evidence that people that have pretty faces as children become more extroverted with time because they get constant reinforcements from society for interacting with other people. And now people who are not that fortunate tend to become more introverted with time. And finally, there's a broad range of factors that affect both your face and your psychological traits. Genes. We know that many psychological traits are heritable, and we know that our faces are also heritable. We know that there are genetic disorders that affect both faces and behavior. Hormones. Hormones such as testosterone. Half of the audience roughly is suffering from overdosing testosterone, and I'm sorry guys, but over a long period of time, it is going to affect your hairline. So enjoy it now that you have it. This testosterone is also going to affect your behavior. It's going to increase your social dominance and aggression. Now, it turns out that even prenatal hormones, so the hormones that you were exposed to in your mother's womb, will affect both the shape of your facial features and the development of your brain and your future character traits and so on. And there's some very clear examples of that, like, for example, gender conversion therapy, where people start taking hormones in order to change their gender. As you can see here, this person was transitioning from a male to female, and you can see how essentially face is becoming prettier. The distribution of collagen is changing, the health of the skin is improving, the density of facial hair is going down. So you can see here that even in adults, you can have dramatic changes in people's facial features just because the exposure to hormones has changed. And finally, developmental history. If your mother abused alcohol during pregnancy, this will affect both your behavior and your facial features, such as in fetal alcohol syndrome, which can be recognized by clinicians just from a short exposure to someone's face. Okay, so the question now is, I hope I made it clear that it would be an extraordinary claim to make that people's intimate traits are not related to their faces. Now, so the question is, can AI be used to predict people's intimate traits on a large scale? So what we've done here, we've done several studies. In one of these studies, we took profile pictures of over 6 million people, their Facebook profile pictures. We used a facial recognition algorithm to detect the face on a picture. Then we used it to convert facial, essentially faces, into strings of vectors of numbers summarizing most important features of these faces. And then we started building very simple predictive models, like logistic regressions or linear regressions, where we took essentially those face vectors for many people and tried to see whether we can predict traits such as political views, personality, and so on. And as you can see on this plot here, you have to look at the blue bars. Computer can predict people's personality with the same accuracy as your work colleagues can after having interacted with you for some time. Again, a pretty shocking fact, just from exposure to one single profile picture of yours, with background cropped, with your hair removed, a computer algorithm can know your personality with the same accuracy as people who spend 8 hours a day with you at work for extended period of time. And by the way, the red bars here represent the accuracy of human judges when shown with the same facial images. You can see that computers are significantly better across the board. And you can also see that those face-based predictions of personality can be now used to predict other life outcomes, such as depression or political views, and so on.
Are we saying that's like 20% accuracy?
This is R squared. So this is essentially correlation squared. So the correlation here would be 0.4, which is actually 0.4 correlation because people say, oh, what is 0.4 correlation? Well, 0.4 correlation is the correlation between the risk of you having cancer and you smoking. So it's a huge, it's a very huge, it's actually, I think it's defined as a large effect size. Great. Political views. In this case, we use profile pictures to predict people's political views by showing a computer a liberal and conservative person and then checking how often a computer will be correct. And you can see here that in nearly 70% of cases, computer can distinguish, can pick the liberal person or conservative person correctly, where 50% would be a random baseline. Now, all of those studies so far, based on faces, were run on profile pictures taken from people's public profiles. So now one can argue, hey, maybe it's not really people's face, but maybe it's makeup, or facial hair, or glasses, or hairstyle, or other grooming or self-presentation strategies than people use. Now, to explore this subject in a bit more depth, we collected not profile pictures, but standardized images from 600 people. We invited them to the lab, controlling lighting, controlling the camera, controlling the angle, removed makeup, facial hair, and made sure that their facial expression was neutral, and tried to see whether we can replicate those results. So what you can see here is two composite images of males. There's about 20 males behind each one of those composite images, and one of these groups is liberal, and another one is conservative. Now, can you guess which of these groups is liberal? Who thinks that people here on your left are liberal? Who thinks that people on your right are liberal? Okay, let's see, great. When you look at those images, and I spend a lot of time looking at them, there are no obvious differences. Nothing really jumps at me saying I'm liberal. And yet, I show those slides to so many audiences, including sometimes hundreds of people in the room, and there's a tremendous accuracy. People always know which of those are liberals, despite not being able to actually pinpoint what precisely makes the difference. You can see they're very similar. Those are 20 different people here from those people, and yet when you average their faces, they end up being pretty similar. Now, females. Who thinks that the group on the left is liberal? Who thinks that the group on the right is liberal? Again, guys, that's the 100% accuracy. That's very impressive. And now we try to, so what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to look more deeply into, we know that computers are very accurate. We know that humans are very accurate when they look at aggregate images. Computers can also do it on the individual level. But now it's actually pretty difficult to identify all of those Forrest Gumps, those tiny little bits of signal that actually help us to make those predictions. For females, for example, you can see that liberal females have slightly different outline of their jaws. Right? Like it's not a huge difference. Actually, it's halfway already to the difference between males and females. So females have generally narrower jaws than males. Now, liberal females are half between an average man and an average woman, which is actually a pretty significant difference. So now let's see how accurately can we distinguish between liberals and conservatives just based on two images taken in the lab. And as you can see here, the accuracy is even higher than what we were able to achieve when running those studies on social media. So it's pretty clear that it's not self-presentation, not grooming. It's actually your face that gives out information about your political views. And again, it's not just happening in our labs. There are APIs out there, Face++, Microsoft Cognitive Services, and others that allow uploading facial images and then will give you predictions related to the psychodemographic profiles of faces on the picture. Great. So what does it mean that it's possible to predict people's intimate traits based on the digital footprints, ranging from Facebook likes to images of their faces? One of the most important outcomes, most significant outcomes, is, in my view, the revolution in marketing. And in the past, essentially, people were marketing large groups, males and females, wealthy and poor. Nowadays, you can essentially change marketing in such a way as to target people as individuals. And this is great if you are trying to help people to stop smoking or take this new amazing course on AI so their job prospects are improving. But it's pretty problematic if you want to sell people cigarettes or alcohol or make them vote for a candidate that doesn't really have their best interest in mind. And now, how can you do that? Well, if you are a large company that has a lot of digital footprints of many users, you can just run those models, create people's profiles, and then target them with appropriate ads. And in fact, all of the large online advertisers are doing exactly that. They may not call the dimensions that they're extracting from users' profiles, they may not call them personality or political views. They may call it, just multidimensional user spaces. But essentially what they're doing, they're extracting intimate traits of people and then using machine learning models to optimize marketing. But you can do it more explicitly, and you can also do it if you don't have access to any data. And we, in fact, try to do that, exactly that, to measure the efficiency of personality-based marketing. So what we have done, we used Facebook online advertising platform, and we used the fact that likes predict personality. We know that people, introverts and extroverts, open-minded people and conservative people, they like different things on Facebook. So what we can do, we can just use Facebook marketing platform to target them separately with different ads. So what we would do here was essentially say, hey, please target for me an introverted audience. We don't call it an introverted audience. We just call it an audience of people who like computers and Stargates and Serenity. And separately, target extroverted audiences who like meeting new people and entourage and shuis and drinking and beer pong and theater. So essentially a typical extroverted audience. And then we would design, so first of all, we would show those audiences personality tests just to check if our manipulation worked. And guess what? You can see that extroverted audiences scored significantly higher on extroversion. So we just checked that our manipulation worked. That in fact we can target extroverts and introverts separately on Facebook, even despite the fact that Facebook doesn't provide you this option explicitly. We can just use Facebook likes to achieve psychological targeting. And then what we would do, we would design ads that should attract attention of extroverts and introverts, right? So we have an ad for extroverts, love the spotlight and feel the moment. And we have an ad for introverts. Beauty doesn't have to shout, and just one person sitting calmly and putting on makeup. And we would use those ads to try to sell to people on Facebook the same line of cosmetics. So this is not just a lab experiment. It's actually selling cosmetics on Facebook. And as you can see here, this bar describes sales among introverts. This bar describes sales among extroverts when being shown an introverted ad. And as you can see, introverts are much more likely to buy than extroverts when presented with an introverted ad. And the opposite happens for an extroverted ad. Here, actually, the difference is so essentially 80% more likely to click if they're psychologically matched with an ad that they're seeing. And we calculated those scores for conversion rates and also return on investment. Now, if anyone here works with online advertising, you guys know that sometimes, boosting performance of an ad or a campaign by a few percent is already a great success. If you're spending $100 million a year on online marketing, improving accuracy of targeting, performance of targeting by 3% just saves you $3 million potentially, right? You can achieve boost of up to 80%, so nearly double your performance, just by using a single personality trait and just by using some designs that we just made up in the lab while planning for the experiment. Now, if you're a real marketing company, you would spend a lot of money on producing a lot of different designs and targeting people based on their many different psychological traits and do some A/B testing and potentially boost this accuracy even further. If you are not in the coma in the last few years, you know that it's not only cosmetics that are being sold in this way. Everyone has heard about Cambridge Analytica that essentially was using exactly this approach to try to optimize political communication for Brexit, then Ted Cruz, and finally Donald Trump. And the outrage was so huge that, even our neighbor Mark got dragged to the other coast to explain to the senators what the hell is going on. And not sure if you guys remember the testimony. Mark Zuckerberg was absolutely surprised. How is that possible that someone can take people's Facebook likes and predict their personality? This is just some outrageous technology. And he was very shocked to learn about this, forgetting about the fact that back in 2012, so where Cambridge Analytica people were still in high school, Facebook patented the technology that Cambridge Analytica later used to essentially extract people's personality from their Facebook likes. Which brings me to my last few slides here. Now, as we are moving forward, we're going to be producing more and more Facebook likes, Facebook status updates, search queries, emails, and all sorts of other digital footprints. And on the other hand, algorithms are going to get better at turning those digital footprints into accurate predictions of our intimate traits, psychological traits, and our future behavior, which essentially means that going forward, we're going to have much less privacy, if any, than we have now. And when I say that, people say, well, okay, that's great. Thank you for warning us. Let's just take an action and give users control over data. This will solve all of the problems, right? Of course not. Even the government is not able to control their data. If there's a motivated third party, they're going to get your data whether you want it or not, and no citizens have enough time, education, and assets to actually be able to successfully protect their data against, again, a motivated third party. Not to mention that if you actually gave people an option of just switching off access to the data, taking full control of it, then many of the wonderful technologies that we have now would stop working. Google Maps and the navigation capability that it's providing. It's an amazing technology, perhaps the greenest and one of the most world and life-changing technologies of recent years. Imagine how many liters of gas are being saved every day by people optimizing the route to work. Imagine how many hours that we can spend, working more, spending, or with family are being saved because of the same feature. Imagine how many people are enabled to travel far and wide, that go and work in new cities because they're not lost in geographical spaces. Now, if we stopped sharing our geographical location with Google Maps, this system stops working. And people may say, well, that's okay, maybe it's a price worth paying, and maybe it is, I don't know. But we definitely have to think about those trade-offs. And I'm sure you can come up with gazillions of other examples of technologies that essentially would stop working or would work much less efficiently if user data was not essentially shared with the service provider. Not to mention that even if we shut down all of those services and you're taking full control over your data, Homo sapiens is just a really narcissistic species. We are going to be tweeting and blogging and posting our pictures on Instagram, and this is already enough data for a half-witted algorithm to already predict your intimate traits with extremely high accuracy. And at this stage, I hope essentially to have convinced you that there's very little chance that we will find a way out of having lost our privacy. To which people say, well, whatever, that's okay. Let's just move on with our lives and see what happens. And I just want to pause here for a second, because losing our privacy is not just some creepy marketing or more Cambridge Analyticas. And this is nicely illustrated by those two composite images here. You have two groups of males, and those males differ on an important psychodemographic trait. Can you guys guess what is the difference between those two groups of males? Great. It's essentially an aggregate picture of 100 gay and 100 straight males. And if you show an image of a straight and a gay man to a computer algorithm, and I'm talking about algorithms that I can train on my laptop. I'm not talking about, sci-fi AI that you guys can train on your supercomputers here at Google. You can essentially reach an accuracy of over 80%. And given 5 facial images, the accuracy grows to 90%. We have now replicated those results in the lab data, where people's facial hair and makeup and hair were hidden, and predictions are even more accurate than that. And now if you match it with this map that shows you where the government is going to kill you if you are gay, this nails down the point, this emphasizes the point that losing our privacy is not just some creepy marketing, that losing our privacy is the matter of life and death for many people out there. And guys, also consider the following. People get really upset about those studies showing that you can predict sexual orientation from people's faces. It is upsetting. Those studies are made to be upsetting because I'm a privacy researcher and I want to study the privacy risks. I'm not creating new algorithms. I'm using algorithms that are already widely used by governments and companies around the world to predict, for example, whether someone is a criminal or not. But they would not boast, of course, how accurate those algorithms are. But what people keep forgetting is that predictions based on faces are actually not that accurate compared with predictions based on your browsing logs, credit card use, Facebook likes, status updates, emails, and so on. Predictions based on faces are just perhaps the most difficult and most noisy types of predictions. If you're afraid of the government predicting your sexuality based on your face, you should be really afraid of your government predicting your sexuality based on your Facebook likes or status updates or tweets or all of those other things that we all share online at all times. And this is just my last slide, I promise. So I would like to encourage you to think about this problem as you think about a tornado. We can all agree in this room that tornadoes are bad. And we can probably all agree in this room that we should make tornadoes illegal. Like we should probably all agree in this room that we should make intrusions of privacy illegal. But very much like with the tornadoes, the fact that we want to make them illegal will not stop them from coming. And the sooner we accept the fact that even if we delegalize tornadoes or delegalize fires, those things are going to be happening, the sooner we can move on to having a mature, adult discussion about how to make sure that a post-privacy world in which a motivated third party can invade virtually anyone's privacy, how to make sure that this world is still a habitable and safe place to live. Thank you, guys.
In terms of manipulation, it's a word that we're, I think, starting to hear about a lot more with respect to algorithms and its outcomes on society. You pointed out some examples that I think people are starting to that are either known or they're starting to get to know. Are there certain risks or benefits to society that the end of privacy actually will provide in a way that maybe the layman might not know, and you would from just being deep in the research?
This is a great question, and I'm a big fan of privacy, and I would like to have my privacy, and I would like you guys to have your privacy. But essentially, my point is that despite our best intentions, the technological progress that is unstoppable, because we're not giving up those shiny toys. We are not giving up AI because it's going to invade our privacy, but also cure cancer and drive our cars and improve our economy and improve our education and so on. So we're not giving it up. And in the process, we'll also invade our privacy. So while I'm not a fan of this, I'm also seeing it as inevitable. But while I see it as inevitable, I also cannot stop recognizing there are some advantages of it. Look, transparency, and everyone would say, hey, we should have transparency, right? Especially if you're a politician, you should be transparent with your taxes. Or if you're a businessman, you should be transparent with whether you commit crime or not. If you are a citizen, you should be transparent with whether you commit crimes or not. Transparency is the opposite of privacy. When we have privacy guaranteed and technologically enforced, child traffickers and abusers, corrupt politicians, tax-avoiding businessmen also have privacy. It's much more difficult to police. And there are systems out there where essentially when we remove privacy of certain outcomes, the system becomes much more efficient and much better. There's more trust in it. Example, reputation system on eBay. The moment you remove the privacy of the interaction between the seller and the buyer, and now the record of the interaction is public and both sides can, judge each other, suddenly the market became much more filled with trust. People can buy products without worrying that they will lose their money and so on. Credit score is another example. Credit score is a big invasion of privacy. Right? Suddenly your past financial performance and failing on debts and whatnot is nearly publicly known to anyone that wants to sell, that you want to buy something from. And yet, those credit scores broaden the access to financial products to people that were historically deprived of it, underprivileged people, right? In the past, if you're a banker and you have no access to information about people's financial history, you would judge them by their looks. You see, oh, you look poor, or you look like you're a minority. I'm not giving you a loan because I'm not risking my bank's money. It's very unfair. I'm not going to admit to it, but I'm going to do this, and there's evidence that that's what people do. But now that when people have credit scores, you can say, well, I have now reason to trust you because you were performing well in the past. So again, there are some problems again with those invasions, this type of invasion of privacy, credit score or a citizen score in China, but there are also clear benefits, and especially benefits to underprivileged people who traditionally were completely cut off from jobs and loans and so on.
Very good, very scary. And I thought I already had gotten peace with the fact that we have no privacy, but this is making me a little more worried. So I'm active on Facebook and like to support my friends by liking their posts and their pages and things like that. I have a lot of likes, and I'm worried by this. What can I do to have more privacy? Unlike things, stop liking. Is there anything? I do know already that I can I get facially recognized. And I had a college reunion recently, and I put up pictures from college. 3 of my friends Facebook facially recognized, several years later, a couple decades later, even though we had changed. And so what do I do to, stop liking? Is that going to help? Stop using Waze?
Don't. Keep living your life in a convenient way, because you can stop using Facebook and maybe Waze, but you can't stop using credit cards. You can't cover your face when you're walking the streets. You can give up online banking. That's essentially impossible these days. And those types of data are much more revealing about you than your Facebook likes and status updates. And also by removing yourself from those online social platforms, you're essentially leaving those platforms for, you essentially take your opinions as well. And you take your social support that you give to other people. So essentially making the experience worse for everyone else. And let me make a radical statement here. That I would actually argue that if you can afford losing your privacy, and everyone in this room can afford losing their privacy because we live in a liberal, peaceful, wonderful place in the world. Or much luckier than 99.9% of other people. Now, we are all going to lose privacy, or we already did. Now, if you actively deprive yourself of privacy, if you use those channels openly, you are essentially moving the world in a direction where it's going to be safer for people who now live in countries like Saudi Arabia or places like, some inner cities in America, where losing the privacy of political views or sexual orientation or religiosity can be essentially, a matter of life and death. And this is not a new situation. Harvey Milk was arguing that if you can afford to come out as gay, you should do this, because then you essentially show your neighbors that you are just like anyone else. You are removing the taboo subject. And he paid the highest price for doing exactly that himself. But now, because of the price he paid, and many other people paid over the many years, we're now living in a completely different world. And one could make a very similar argument for the online space and all sorts of other intimate traits.
So most of my Facebook posts are public because I've done social media for a living. So you think continue with
Keep it this way. And you'll pay the price, because there will be a bigot somewhere there. There will be prejudice against you because of your religious views or sexual orientation or political views. But you know what? The problem with our world is not us losing privacy. The problem with our world is bigotry. The problem that I cannot freely reveal my sexual orientation when I'm traveling to other places is not the privacy itself is not the problem. The problem is that there are those assholes there that are going to be prejudiced against me and potentially even hurt me, right? And in our actions, including voting for politicians, we should essentially adopt a view that privacy is gone. Because if you adopt this view, it changes everything. Can you really trade with Saudi Arabia, where they kill gay people and kill atheists? Well, politicians today say, well, of course you can, because if you're gay and born in Saudi Arabia, just don't tell anyone. Well, this doesn't work anymore, right? This thinking breaks. We need a radical change in how we think about interactions in this country and with other countries, and we need to essentially not fight for privacy because it's gone. And, I love it, I would love it back, but it's gone. We should fight the bigotry, because that's the war that we can still win. We kind of lost the war on privacy.
All right, I think we are going to wrap today's session. Thank you so much, Michal, for coming here. It was great having you and listening to your
Thanks for
talk.
having me.
Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.